What is in our airspace? Something is flying over our country. It's flying, it's an object, and we can't identify it. Join us today on Speaking of Spirits as we discuss unidentified flying objects. Thank you for joining us today on Speaking of Spirits. Today we're going to talk about UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And we're going to choose some of our favorite stories to go over them today. As we started out though, what are these things? Something is in our airspace. Something is flying over our countries. A lot of times they're flying over our military bases. These are objects that are in the air. We can't identify them. Some of the things they do, the maneuvers they make, are beyond what we can explain, what we are aware of. So where are they coming from? What do they do? That's what we're discussing today. Joining us today, we've got Tim, Colleen, Katie, and myself, Mark. So we will be doing the podcast today. And as always, we thank you for joining us.
So Tim, I know that you were looking at the Roswell incident, right?
I was indeed.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That's a fascinating subject.
All right, let me click on that tab. I have 3 different tabs
Oh.
today.
This is a 3-tabber today.
Everyone should be very, very proud of me.
And Roswell is always a good place to start talking about UFOs.
It really is, because it has a lot to do with stories and timing and war and.
Mm-hmm.
So Roswell, the incident, happened in 1947. And it was an interesting time because Roswell had a really, really, really long airstrip. And they had all sorts of different planes that they were testing out throughout service times of World War II. And so there were a ton of Army and Air Force personnel all around Roswell. And so when this incident happened, the government was on top of it lickety-split. And it happened in the middle of a farmer's field. Most folks know the story. There were deceased aliens on the scene, they said. And they said one of them was still alive and very injured. And so I had the opportunity to live in Roswell for 6 whole months of my life. And when I was there, I was very interested in this topic.
Yeah.
And it is the main tourist trap attraction for Roswell. And that's actually how they generate most of the money for the city now. So I got to walk around and talk to lots of folks. And I brought this up as much as I possibly could. And I talked to about 10 people who were around there in 1947. And every story I got was almost exactly the same. And the story was, everybody knew the farmer. He was a stand-up dude, wasn't crazy, just
a normal guy.
A normal guy.
Normal farmer dude.
And everybody liked him. And basically, word got out immediately because folks saw it, things were happening, poo-poo was ensuing. And everyone said that they were going to release the UFO, what it was. They were going to have this direct to the press knowledge for the country. And it was just going to happen. Well, it was the beginning of the Cold War, right around that time.
Right.
And so it was very advantageous for said army to have all of this new stuff to look at and to be secret. So they say that before the press release was able to go, the big dudes stepped on it and said, "Oh, not so. It's a weather balloon. It's a weather balloon on fire. Here's the pieces. It's a weather balloon.
There's nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here."
Yeah, didn't they say it was like, I mean, eventually it came out that it was some kind of metal that we don't even have that metal on the periodic table. It doesn't exist.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are lots of things like that.
Yeah.
I talked two of the people.
Uh-huh.
They were former military. And at the times, they were just whatever you want to call it, peons, and they finished their career, whatever they did, and they ended up moving back to Roswell just so they could do their own kind of investigations, which I thought was really cool. At the time, they were older. This was in the early 2000s. And so one of them, he was a hoot. He was an old runner, like one of the first like big time marathon runner guys.
Okay.
And he blew out his knees, and after he blew out his knees, he decided to go back to Roswell. And so I talked to him quite a bit, and he had a lot of fun stories about the area. But he said that with everything that he was able to dig up and to look, and people that he was able to talk to, and things that he was able to see, that he never said that it was an alien. I don't even think he said UFO. But he definitely said it was not a weather balloon. And that the things that transpired in that day, with the level of army, with the level of just eyewitness viewers of the things leaving, it was huge. And I thought it was just really cool and really, really intriguing. And not to get political, but I will. I'm not scared.
But we will. Okay. Go ahead.
It seems like it was kind of the first part of the lying that started with the head-ups going on down through the media and focusing our attention elsewhere. And by golly, that worked. We can do it again.
Oh, mass misdirection. Yeah.
Intentional misinformation.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Also what they call it. Yep.
Yeah, and I feel that it started right there. And I think that's where we kind of saw the split. There's this sector that really wanted to tell the truth, and they were going to, and then the bigger ones said, nope, that's not what we're going to do. And then Velcro came out, and computers, and whatever. Microwaves.
We got a lot of great technology from that, yes. And just to take a quick step back, if anybody is not familiar with the Roswell incident, this happened, as Tim said, 1947 outside of Roswell, New Mexico. There was some type of craft that landed in a farmer's field there in Roswell. And right after it crashed, it didn't land, it crashed in the field. Right after it crashed, the U.S. military, I think it was the Army. Was that before it was the Air Force? I think it was still the
Army
U.S.
Air Corps.
Army Air Corps.
Probably
at the time.
At that point, yeah.
I think it was still the U.S. Army Air Corps. Side note, U.S. Army Air Corps later split off and become the U.S. Air Force. And I can't remember what year that happened, but I think it was still the U.S. Army Air Corps. Anyway, right after this craft crashed in the farmer's field, the U.S. Army Air Corps was immediately on top of it. And they had everything hauled off. And then, as Tim was referring to, later on, they really came down and landed hard on a lot of people with a lot of pressure, saying, this is what you saw.
Yeah.
You can't tell the truth. This is what you saw. We're telling you, this is what you're going to tell people. This is what you saw.
Yeah, and you had people in the military who they threatened them with the brig, basically. You cannot say anything. Your career is over, and we're right. It's court-martial. I mean, it's...
Yeah, the military members that were going to say the truth, they were threatened with a lot of pressure. And the U.S. Army Air Corps, or somebody from the government, put as much pressure as possible on they could on the civilians in Roswell to not say what was going on or what they
Especially
really
the
saw.
mortician.
So, I didn't even think... Well, wait a minute now. Oh, I thought the military... So there was the alleged bodies of the aliens that were on board the craft. But
And
I thought
the Army asked for 3 child-sized caskets from the mortician.
I did not know.
Oh, wow.
That is spooky.
Now, wasn't the show Alien Autopsy all about the autopsy of one of these?
Mhm.
It was kind of debunked later on, the whole thing. But was there so they did take the bodies and they had them in caskets. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they did autopsies of these things. I mean,
Well, they kind of autopsied everything. Not only the bodies that they found, but they also said this is where we reversed engineered the technology, the ship itself. And this is where we got what we were referring to. This is where we got things like microwaves. A lot of technology
realize that.
came out
Oh, it's
shortly
funny.
after that.
oh, I thought you were just making... Oh, I did not know the link there.
Yeah, that they actually took the story is, if I understand it right, when the Army confiscated all this information they could, they put it on trucks and moved it to what we now know as Area 51 in Nevada.
Oh.
And this is where they did a lot of the research. This is where they reverse engineered the ship and the technology. And from that, a lot of technology we have today.
Well, think about the planes in 1947.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
So,
I mean, AT-6. You had radial engine aircraft, and not. You really didn't. When was it? I don't know, and I should know this as an air traffic controller, right? When
if
did
you,
the first
if you look
jets
at the
come out?
plans for the SR-71 Blackbird,
Okay,
it was in 1955.
so right after this.
Oh.
7
So-
years.
That's interesting. Yeah, I was thinking it had to have been the 50s.
And the
Interesting. I
SR-71
didn't-
Blackbird was secret for how long?
A long time.
Till 19...
That didn't exist
Long
until
time.
I think.
late 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it's fascinating because I don't believe in coincidences. I just don't.
Oh, I don't
I've
either.
never have. It's like,
Oh,
and
no.
I know I try not to be a conspiracy theorist, although some rabbit holes I do go down because I think that's a lot happening in our world right now. But, yeah, this is fascinating because I never made those
really
links. I never made the,
Oh, me either.
yeah, Roswell is a big can. And the further you go down the rabbit hole, the further you think, what do you know?
That's another thing about Roswell, not only the technology, but again, as Tim pointed out, this was the first time a lot of people, military personnel and civilians and people saw and heard something, experienced something, and completely disagreed with the government's explanation of what happened.
yeah, and so then
This
they're
was
threatened.
the first,
Yeah.
the first major event
Well, and this is
where they were like, what the government's saying is
So-
not lining up.
yeah, and this is
Yeah.
in 1947.
When
When-
was the radio program about remember the Orson Welles radio program about
War of the Worlds.
World of Worlds? When did that come out? That was right or after this? In the 50s? Because my
yeah, I
mom
think it was in the
remembered.
50s,
Yeah, my
yeah.
mom remembered. So she was born in 42, and she remembers listening to the Orson Welles thing. And I thought it was in the 50s, but maybe
That was in the heyday of radio.
Let
it
me
was. So it was earlier.
open a new tab for my 3 tabs.
Yeah,
that
I
I'm
was
proud
going to say, let me.
Yeah, so everybody's looking that up. So you're going to hear a lot of coughing right now. So I just want... I'm going to bust
Sorry.
Tim's
my
chops.
allergies are
I know, right?
off
So
now.
we walked into the studio tonight and it was like walking into a Cheech and Chong van. There was so much smoke in here. that Tim's eyes are bloodshot, and it wasn't pot, it was incense. That's what he says
we want
anyway.
to clarify that was incense.
Well, that's what he says it was. And we're all like hacking and coughing because it's still smoky as hell in here. Anyway.
So in interest of full disclosure, it's the coolest incense in the world. It's a waterfall incense, and so you put it on top of a piece of pottery, and it kind of goes through a hole, and the incense smoke falls down like waterfalls. It's the coolest
It is
thing.
cool, but
It's
holy hell.
justifiable.
If you do about
He was in
7
here, yeah.
right after one another, apparently it leads to podcast issues.
So when was that? Did you guys find that out?
Well, I was hoping it was going to
was
pop right on up
Speaking
here.
of, when that stuff got moved to like Area 51 and Area 51, the base grew. I have a friend and her dad actually worked on Area 51 after they expanded so much. And they always thought, like, he's a military man. He's sworn to, like, secrecy or whatever to keep, for safety reasons or whatever. And they really thought when he was dying that
1938.
that he would at least say something about what he was doing, because even his wife didn't know. And they were at least like, okay, like, were you doing military stuff? Was it, like, safety stuff? And he took that to the grave, and they said that was really unusual for him. So it kind of speaks to the pressure.
Yeah. Well, think about, so there's different levels of clearances in the military, and so Area 51 in places like, intelligence and stuff like that, it's higher than top secret.
Mm-hmm. It's insane, though.
That's
crazy.
So they can't.
Mm-hmm.
So my uncle was a truck driver, and he worked at Area 51. Yes, and Tonopah. So there's the two. Mm-hmm. So he had all these clearances to get in there, and for years after he left, he would get knocks on the door, reminding him that he couldn't talk about anything he saw there.
And he was just a truck driver.
Yeah, but he had clearance to get into
the base,
like into the mountain. I mean,
but
yeah.
if he is a truck driver, he's delivering and picking up.
Stuff.
He had loads where he had black SUVs and a helicopter with him the whole time.
Those are the scariest ones in the world that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I was a truck driver late at night. And of course it always happened around Mountain Home, because it does.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's an Air Force base in Mountain Home, Idaho.
Yeah.
There's 3 dark, very scary looking crew cab trucks with campers in front of a black semi-truck with placards that I know placards have my hazardous materials endorsement.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And then 3 more trucks behind it.
Spooky.
So I lived in Childress, Texas for a while. The worst 2 years of my life. Let me clarify that right now. If you're from Childress, sorry, but really hated it there. And it's like, I think it's Highway 287, and there's 2 that merge there. And so you can either go straight up north to Canada, right? Or east-west, like into Dallas, kind of thing, right? Or Amarillo. And Childress is literally a hole in the wall. There's really nothing there. There's like population 3,000. One of these rigs came in one night. And I have to say, I helped get that county wet. And then I left town. So I was both the most loved and hated woman that ever lived there. It hadn't been wet since Prohibition, and I wasn't going to live in a town I could not buy whiskey. So I won by 7 votes. Anyway, one of those rigs came into town in the middle of the night. I mean, they gotta stop somewhere and eat. Mm-hmm. Middle of the night, all the SUVs, the helicopter, the whole 9 yards, guys with like machine guns, serious shit. Black uniforms, didn't even have a military emblem on them. Spooky. It's like super secret spy stuff. And yeah, they don't say anything to anybody. They order. It's complete silence.
Black clothes, black boots, black guns,
everything.
Black trucks, black.
And no identifiers.
Nope, no identifiers. No identifiers. No military uniform. Because all of the guys that I hung around with there were all military, ex-military, retires, or veterans, of some sort, from all these different branches. There isn't an emblem on a uniform. It's black.
No rank insignia,
Nothing.
no emblem, no anything.
Nothing.
No DOT number.
No.
No nothing.
Nothing. It's scary stuff. You're like,
That
what
is
the hell is on that load? Yeah, and I did hazmat spill response in Texas. And so a couple of times we had rollovers and we had the Mexican government come up in their helicopters and get their little loads and go away. Yeah. So, yeah. So anyway, I digress. So
I have more questions and answers
I know.
right now, but we'll come back.
Anyway.
Seriously.
Katie, are we want to move on or?
There's just two more things about
Oh, okay.
Roswell that I wanted to... Let me get to my tab. So, I don't know if I'll find the section. But
Moving on to the other.
In 1994, for decades, many UFO researchers were skeptical of the government's changed account. And in 1994, the U.S. Air Force released a report in which they conceded that the weather balloon story had been bogus. According to the 1994 explanation, the wreckage came from a spy device created for an until then classified project called Project Mogul. The device, a connected string of high-altitude ballooned equipments and microphones, just so they could justify the metal and junk, was designed to float fortify over the USSR, detecting sound waves at a stealth distance. Anyway,
Project Mogul sounds like something Elon Musk would be involved in, right?
Seriously.
except the weather balloons would land themselves.
Yeah. They wouldn't crash, right?
Anyway, so reading more
Interesting.
into the article, people are throwing a lot of flack at this story too, and the Air Force kind of said, well, it was partially true with that. I was like,
Here's the deal. Just, how about the truth?
Yeah. Well, see, that's our.
Because I think we're so, but maybe not then, right? In the 40s. But now, we're so much like, well, shit, and don't die. We know they're out there.
Mm-hmm.
So just tell us, I guess that's why they're starting to release stuff, like
They
the
did
footage.
in 2020. The U.S. Navy
The
released
US
a
Navy,
lot of
yes.
information on.
So-
it was
UFOs.
actually before that. So that's why I like the Nimitz.
Ah.
So
Yes.
it is an amazing thing. So if you go to the History Channel or whatever you like to look at on the computers, and you type in the Nimitz UFO, or the Tic Tac sighting, whatever you want to call it, in 2004 this happened. And in 2004 is when all of a sudden people had technology that... when
As
you
Tim
see
waves his
poo-poo-
phone in the air.
Yeah.
when you see poo-poo, you can record poo-poo. It's amazing. Well, so it kind of got out that this thing happened. And they wanted to squash it once again. But they couldn't. Because this generation is harder to shut up, turns out. And so I forget the word they use. It's basically the word for we can't confirm or deny, whatever that word is.
Yeah.
So they did that for a really, really long time. Then it was released again in 2012, I believe. And then it was an official release in 2020. And the official release, you can find that video that I was talking about, it's the most blessed 2 minutes and 45 seconds you've ever seen.
Yeah.
Because this is them saying, we know not.
We don't know what it is.
And it kind of goes, it explains everything that is in the recording device thingy. It shows the degrees, it shows that it's in infrared, it shows the speed, it shows the altitude. And it's like 20,000 feet. And you see them trying to figure out what's going on. And it goes through everything that recording device can go through to try to figure it out. And then at the very, very end, it says that tic-tac looking thing went out of frame so fast and so straight, none of their advanced equipment could follow it or tell you where it went or how fast it got there.
I'm sure they were locked on it there for a while to try to get their speed. So, and I'm assuming that it was the air traffic control equipment on board ship.
I think it was a plane.
Oh, was it the plane? I
It
don't
was
know.
recorded from another aircraft.
Oh, was it plane? Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're trying to lock onto it to figure it out because that gives them all their information on. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Crazy. So I digress even one more time. And so these are my three favorites. And I've been trying to really shorten them because I have lots of opinions on it. Let me pull up my tab.
Well, Tim was doing that. Quick story about Childress, Texas. I was parked there at a truck stop and got my truck hit. Somebody hit my truck while
Were they
I was
drunk?
parked.
Were they drunk?
No.
Yeah. So
In Childress, Texas. That's what I remembered of when you said that.
yeah, children.
I was
truck stop,
parked
and
at
that's
the truck stop and
So-
somebody hit my truck.
It's kind of funny that this Walmart was coming in there, right? And they're trying to open, and you need I don't know, it was a ridiculous amount of people to open a Walmart, not to keep it running, but to open it to get it stocked. They couldn't find enough people that could pass the drug test to open the Walmart, so they had to they had to bring them in from all over the place, yeah, to get that store open. Yeah, it was kind of funny. Yeah.
In the whiskey. So to bring my two stories together.
Okay.
Okay.
I am going to tell you about the first recorded UFO sighting in these United States of America.
Well, let's see. When was it?
It was in 1639.
Oh, that is really
I would
early.
I would like to digress though and point out that this is the first recorded from an Anglo-Saxon perspective because
there
there's
you
a
go.
lot of Native American interpretations and sightings and things like that are recorded, but they're not recorded and written down. They're verbally recorded. So I think that's important to keep in
There
mind.
we go.
Okay.
So we have to keep in mind the date. It's 1639, right? And it is the first governor of Massachusetts. His name is John Winthrop. And I'm just going to read it because
Okay.
it's pretty dang cool.
All right.
On March 1st, 1639, John Winthrop opened his diary in which he recorded the trials and triumphs of his fellow Puritans as they made a new life in America. As the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony put pen to paper, he began to recount the most unusual event that had recently caused a stir among the English immigrants. Winthrop wrote that earlier in the year, James Everell, a sober and discreet man, and two others had been rowing a boat in the muddy river, which flowed through swampland and emptied into a tidal basin in the Charles River, when they saw a great light in the night sky. When it stood still, it flamed up, and was about 3 yards square, the governor reported. When it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine, or a tic-tac. Over the course of 2 to 3 hours, the boatman said that the mysterious light ran as swift as an arrow, darting back and forth between them and the village of Charleston, a distance of approximately 2 miles. Diverse other credible persons saw the same light. After about the same place, Winthrop added. The governor wrote that when the strange apparition finally faded away, the 3 Puritans in the boat were stunned to find themselves 1 mile upstream, as if the light had transported them there. The men had no memory of their rowing against the tide, although it's possible they could have been carried by the wind or a reverse tidal flow. The mysterious repositioning of the boat could suggest that they were unaware of part of their experience. Some researchers would interpret this as a possible alien abduction if it happened today.
Wow.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. That's really fascinating.
It
That's
really is.
wild.
Huh.
And that does line up with a lot of abduction stories
Tell you what.
Yeah.
with the information that's in there. So
Yeah.
So a tic-toc crashed, a tic-toc flying, and it was a tic-toc in 1639. I rest my case.
Well, speaking of tic-tacs, one of mine talks about that too, but it's from 1561.
Wow.
So,
I don't
You're
know.
on to something there, I think.
Okay, let's have it.
Okay, so
Go
this
ahead.
is the celestial phenomenon in 1561 in Nuremberg, which at the time was the Roman Empire, so it actually wasn't Nuremberg. Anyway, many witnesses described it as a battle out of the sun. But what is interesting to me, because of your stories of the Tic Tacs, if you look at the wood carving from this celestial phenomenon that was put in like the news and stuff at the time, look at these little things. Those are like the little Tic Tacs, right? The long skinny things. Isn't that crazy?
Huh.
So that was, so apparently early in the morning, there were several witnesses throughout the city that saw like what they thought was a battle in the sky. So they thought there were like clouds of smoke, spheres falling to the earth, a large triangular object, lots of different colored lights, and it lasted for a couple of hours. And so at the time, they thought it was like the end of days,
Yeah,
like
I could
God
see
was
why
coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And today, there's interpretations that it was just some sort of like celestial event, like a
Meteor shower, except for the
Yeah.
triangles.
Yeah.
Until you said that, that's where I was
The triangles and the cylindrical tube-like objects shooting at each other.
shooting at
Yes,
each other.
Exactly.
That sounds like a war between UFOs.
Yeah.
That's also a fairly common report. That's been reported quite a few times.
What, them shooting at each other?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. There's theory in the UFO world that there's actually different, I guess for lack of a better term, species, different UFOs, different cultures.
Yeah.
One of them is really good in trying to protect humanoids, and the other one is evil and wants to destroy or enslave humanoids. And so there is a war going on between the two. And there have been multiple stories throughout history of you can see objects in the sky look like they are shooting at each other.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, and it does say that there were similar sightings to that one, like during Good Friday in 1554, and during the 30 Years' War, that there were like battles in the sky. So it kind of makes you wonder. I don't know. A lot of people are like, "Oh, it's religious implications and prophecies by the church or whatever."
Well, when that's all you know, then that's where you
obviously
go.
where
Yeah,
you're going
it-
to turn.
Right.
Yeah.
When you consider they didn't even have electricity back then.
Right.
It must have been terrifying.
So they're seeing
like-
things in
Yeah.
the sky shooting at each other. Yeah, they're going to try to explain it with the knowledge they had at the time.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
It is interesting. So, interesting little
And-
connection there.
Another, just to throw this out there, another theory, a lot of people think the Roswell accident was a result of a battle.
I've never
That
heard
the
that.
object
No, I
that
hadn't
crashed
heard
into
either.
the farmer's field somehow got damaged, and that's why it crashed.
Huh.
Interesting.
Apparently, I'm not going down enough rabbit trails.
I'm not
Because-
going deep
yeah.
enough.
No.
I've not heard that.
I have this ginormous book. It's like, 4 inches thick of UFO sightings. I bought this years ago. But, I don't spend nearly enough time in that book.
Well, it's amazing the places it can lead you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's true.
unfortunately, I have a very sci-fi mind. Like, I grew up on Star Trek.
Yeah.
That's what I did. So it's always been something in my mind, and I've always, when I've had an opportunity to like study the UFOs,
Yeah.
man, it's a good time.
It's a good time.
So what else did you have?
I also wanted to do the Kinross incident. I thought that one was super interesting. That's definitely one that sounds like a government cover-up to me. So that one was in 1953, that time frame. And Felix Moncla was a first lieutenant of the United States Air Force. And the United States Air Force reported that his plane crashed with a Royal Canadian Air Force aircraft, and that's what happened. But the Canadian pilot of that supposed ship said that he wasn't even aware that he was supposedly, intercepting and crashed with another plane. Like he was like,
Usually pilots are pretty knowledgeable what they crash.
Yeah.
You would
They usually
think,
remember
right?
that.
So they call that an air traffic control and inadvertent contact with the ground.
Yes.
Right? And hopefully you're aware of it. Yes, so that's a little fishy. So basically, on November 23rd, Air Defense Ground intercept operators identified an unusual target over Lake Superior, so they sent Felix Moncla and his assistant pilot or whatever to go investigate. So his plane was called the Scorpion. They scrambled to track the unidentified blip to make sure it wasn't anything dangerous, and the air operator said that they were watching, and the unidentified object was like a blip, and they could see Moncla's plane as a blip, and there were two separate blips going towards each other. So they were like, okay, we should be hearing to see what it is. And then the blips merged into one. So they were like, oh no, like there was a wreck, something happened, or they're just passing each other. Mm-hmm. Well, the unidentified blip, eventually, like they froze together. And then the first blip, the unidentified blip, eventually just kept going, right? In the direction it was going. And they never ever saw that second blip, which was supposed to be Moncla's plane, go the other direction. They never saw it fall. They never saw anything. And there was never, they could never find any wreckage. They didn't find any bodies. They never heard anything. That's all they saw was the blips and then just gone into thin air. And so the United States Air Force put out like, oh, it was a Canadian Air Force and they crashed. And then the Canadian pilot was like, it wasn't me because I'm fine and I wasn't over. And then they tried to blame they said that Moncla suffered from vertigo. So he had a spell of vertigo, lost control of the plane, and crashed. Never found any wreckage. And it turns out that the vertigo that he supposedly suffered from was hearsay. There was never any record or any medical record of him ever having vertigo, ever suffering from vertigo. And to this day, there was a Great Lakes diving hoax that said they found the wreckage, but it was debunked and it wasn't the wreckage. And to this day, they've combed the whole lake. They've never found anything, no bodies, and that object just scooted on its way and disappeared.
Yeah, you would think. It didn't mention what aircraft he was flying.
I can sure tell you, but I don't know.
Well,
what
I'm just curious because you would think that there would be.
When was it? 1957.
53.
53.
Yeah, there would be some sort of wreckage at least on the
Well,
water.
If air traffic control was that locked in, though, they're usually pretty good about their location.
Yeah,
Right.
they'd be able to find
So
some.
even if he went down from there, they would have had an idea of where to look for.
Exactly. You can sink pretty darn quick, but.
Yeah, but even if you sink, though, there's something.
Well,
you would think
it was the Great Lakes too. It's not like it was out in the ocean. Like,
yeah, but they're
Great Lakes can get pretty deep.
They're very deep and they're very, very cold. So if there's wreckage and they find it, you're usually very well preserved too.
It's where the Loch Ness Monster's cousin lives.
Yes.
Yes.
There.
That's another podcast.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. An F-89 was sent to investigate.
Huh.
An RCAF C-47 Skytrain.
Yeah, C-47 went to.
Well, that's what they said. This is what they said, the Royal Canadian plane that crashed into it, which the Royal Canadian Air Force was like, it wasn't us. So he was
Royal Canadian Air Force 47?
That's
C-47 Skytrain.
C-47. That's a big bird.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Yeah, that's what they said happened. But again, the supposed pilot was like, it wasn't me. Like, no one hit me. I wasn't flying.
Yeah, he'd know if he got hit.
Well, that's a
transport
plane.
Yeah.
That's a huge plane.
Big.
Yeah.
Maybe they were illegally transporting maple syrup.
Yeah. Doggone it.
That's a maple syrup ride.
Oh, that's what that was. It's a ginormous pancake somewhere over there.
Doing the side eye. Wasn't us. We weren't here. Yeah, so
interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. Very interesting. And what's interesting is they were very quick to release that report. Like when they went out to see if there was wreckage, there was bad weather, so they couldn't do a super great search, but right away the United States Air Force was like, oh, it was the Royal Canadian, there was a crash. The end, bye. Just shut it down.
Having been in the Coast Guard, I can tell you that is not true. Because nothing ever crashes in perfect weather.
Yeah.
Right. You're like, this is not how this goes.
Yeah.
I know, it's very suspicious from the very start. That whole story is very suspicious because if it was Royal Canadian Air Force, why would you be really, really panicked and scramble to send a jet?
Well, yeah, so radar has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair.
Yeah, so you have the blip that you see on a radar is called a transponder. And like FAA radar is vastly superior to anything we had in the Navy. FAA will tell you the call sign, the altitude, the speed, the type of aircraft, right? In the Navy we had, and the transponder, the 4-letter code, right? There's a 4-letter identifier for every flight. And in the Navy we had the little blip and the 4-letter identifier. No, we had nothing else.
That was it.
I mean, we had like 50-year-old FAA equipment. I mean, it was crazy. You'd think we had the top-notch equipment. No, we had crap equipment. And it was always breaking down. And, yeah. So, it's weird.
Got this model out of Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, exactly. So, back then, think of how old the equipment was. That's all they had was the blip. They probably didn't even have transponders back then. They give you the... So, because there's a transponder code if you're being hijacked. There's a transponder code for I've lost all radio. I'm on radio side. I can't communicate. And there's a transponder code for an emergency. And you just dial it in and boop, it changes. And so that's why when you see on the movies and the hijackers say don't mess with that, it's because you can alert air traffic control. As soon as that code rolls through, we know it's a hijacking.
Something's going on.
Something's going on. So there's 3 different emergency codes, and one of them's hijack. And so, yeah, back then, radar was just a blip. It was just a blip.
Yeah. See, I was in the Coast Guard from 93 to 98, and what we had was binoculars.
Yeah. Right?
Super high tech.
That was our technology, man. That was...
And if that didn't work, we used our hands.
That's
Like Radar O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome. So yeah, that's that situation. Very
interesting.
fishy.
Yeah.
Now,
fishy.
that's actually a story I had not heard before.
I
So-
hadn't either, actually. I was like,
So-
It
That was
wasn't
kinda
highly
cool.
publicized. Go figure.
Yeah,
I
go
wonder
figure.
why. Weird. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, and the other one I had was the Exeter incident, which is kind of a spooky one. I don't know if you guys heard of that one.
I think I have, but it's not, yeah.
The red flashing lights. Basically, in 1965, like heyday of like UFO, in New Hampshire, an 18-year-old was hitchhiking home on New Hampshire Route 150. That's important. He saw 5 bright red lights in the distance. Thought they were police or like a fire truck or something. Kept going, no big deal. Well, then as he got nearer, he noticed the lights were hovering like above the tree line. And there were 2 like farmhouses, and they were like bathed in red light. And these lights were just sitting there in the sky. And he said it looked, you could tell that it was like attached to something. It was something in the sky, but it was completely silent. And he ran to the house because this object like moved over one of the houses. And this kid ran to the door and was like pounding on the door like there's something above your house, and nobody answered. And so he freaked out, ran into the road, flagged a car down, and like stopped them in the road and said, "Let me in the car, I'm freaking out." And this couple took him to the police station. They said he was totally freaked out, like not even coherent. And he made this statement to the police. And the police officer was like, "I know that this kid's telling the truth. Like, I know this kid, he's a good kid, and he's totally freaked out. Like, I can't even calm him down." So the officer radios out to an officer that's like patrolling the area and says, "Hey, I just got this kid that came in." And the officer was like, "That's funny because I just talked to a lady on the side of the road in her car who was so freaked out she couldn't drive because she said an object with 5 bright red lights on New Hampshire Route 105 or 150 followed her for like 12 miles and like hovered over. She stopped eventually and it like hovered over her car." So they were like, "Okay, there's like something fishy going on here." So the 2 officers got the kid. I don't know why they took the kid and traumatized him further, but they went back out there to investigate. And the officers actually saw this object as well. And like they saw the lights, they saw that it was hovering, and it again, like the whole field, the houses were bathed in red light. And they were so freaked out because they were trying to like call for other people, and I like the other officers kind of thought it was like BS, I guess. And so they like hijacked it back and made a report and immediately reported it to the United States Air Force. They said this is like an actual like UFO, like we don't know what it is, we've seen it ourselves. Well, of course, the U.S. Air Force was like, No, it's fine. And then they said it was basically,
Weather balloon with microphones?
yeah, basically.
Right.
No, it was a hanger. There was something refueling. So somebody might know about this, if this is like totally baloney or not. But they said that the hanger, when you refuel, there's like these lights that come up and they stay. And they make sure that you know that there's a plane there, so that when you're refueling, you know there's a plane in the hangar. Blah, blah,
No.
blah.
No.
Don't ask me.
No.
So
I
anyway.
have never heard
No.
of that.
Yeah.
Is this like the Hindenburg?
Yeah.
Yes.
Floating over the...
Is it-
And
is
when
this
do
real
hangers
life?
float? That's kind of my
No.
question.
Is
Why do-
this real life? I don't even know. So then these
That's funny.
these officers like were made a laughing stock
Sure.
basically because it was highly publicized, publicized. And these officers kept pushing and saying like, you've made us a laughing stock and we're not crazy, and they kept pushing for investigations. So then, it wasn't a hanger, it was temperature inversions, it was the stars in the sky that turned red because of the temperature inversions. It's fine that the stars were moving, it happens sometimes.
Odd.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes, so of course it just kept getting pushed to the side, and
And
of
this is
course-
why we don't trust anybody
Yeah.
that's in an official capacity.
Yes, exactly. And so eventually there was somebody that I don't even know, Joe Nickel, a prominent skeptic, and then a major of the United States Air Force who was retired, did say like, it could be like the refueling because they flash bright lights, and so that's kind of like the taken
Yeah,
explanation.
but they don't
It's like-
hover.
yeah, exactly. They said that.
I mean, over a house. When
Yeah,
you're
and they don't-
refueling, you're at altitude.
And they don't refuel over fields and people's houses
And
and
homes,
things
no.
like that.
You're-
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what it says. It says the underbelly of the tankers flash bright red lights in the same pattern, and they hang down at a 60-degree angle and would flutter in the air currents when not being controlled by the boom operator.
Yeah, but they're not right over a house.
Leave. Yeah, exactly.
And they're also not hovering because
And they're not
helicopters
hovering.
are not refueling.
No.
Yeah, I don't understand why it's.
There's
why
a
would you
boom
say-
and no, you're
Why would,
yeah.
yeah.
I
The whole
know.
like this tanker it floats like a leaf. That's how
That's-
it does it. I'm like, no,
And,
That's
and if
really
you
interesting.
had lights hanging down at 60-degree angles, that would possibly interfere with the vehicle you're refueling.
Yeah.
Right.
That'd be a hazard to navigation. You can't
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
this is, like,
be having that on there.
fascinating.
yeah. So
Well,
that's-
you got to remember. So this is before internet.
Yeah.
So a lot of people bought things hook, line, and sinker because you couldn't.
Yeah.
Well, even now, like 90% of the crap that you read's all bogus. But
Yeah.
back then, they didn't have a way to look things up.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it was just, if it wasn't in the newspaper or it wasn't in the library, it wasn't available. You didn't
Yeah,
know.
there's
You
no
didn't
access.
know.
Yep.
So my stories. Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I took a very common, everybody knows the Phoenix Lights. And
Yay, Phoenix Lights.
yay,
Cool.
Phoenix Lights. I thought what's interesting to me was how they poo-pooed this when so many people saw it. And a lot of people saw this. So it was,
And recorded it.
and
Yeah.
recorded it. It's
They
on...
were idiots.
Yes, you can see this all over the place. There's recordings. On March 13th, 1977, between 7:30 and 10:30, thousands of people reported seeing strange bright lights flying over Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Mexico. And no, there must be New Mexico. There must be it. It wasn't just one event. There was a whole series of events that took place that night. And so it went on for 12 hours. Again, maybe the war, right? So the first event was described as a V-shaped object the size of a commercial plane soaring through the sky. One witness from Prescott, Arizona, who wished to be known as JR, said he watched a boomerang-shaped object glide over Granite Mountain. It was at least a mile wide. Well, we don't have aircraft a mile wide.
We do not. But again, that object, triangular shaped object, very, very large,
Very large.
and no
Sound.
engine sounds
No
at all.
sound.
That's
Yeah.
been recorded multiple times.
Yes.
Yeah.
He said there's no way it's from this planet. We don't have anything this big. He said it was totally silent. And then He said, I've never seen anything close to the colors from the exhaust that propelled it. So it had an exhaust to it of multicolors. So it was as big as downtown Prescott, Arizona, and completely blocked out the stars. Silent.
Oh, that is so spooky.
The orange and red lights were later explained as flares dropped by the military. Now, I've seen flares. They're not a mile wide. And they don't look like boomerangs. Whatever. Anyway, the V-shaped object remains unexplained. Fast forward 24 years. We still don't know what the Phoenix lights were, but now a lot more people are talking about them. Right? So you have this Dr. Lynn Kitey. She watched the Phoenix lights arrive, and she's one of the few people who photographed them. She stayed silent for years because of ridicule, and she's a doctor. She didn't want to be ridiculed and driven out of whatever practice she had and branded as crazy. But finally, the Pentagon came forward and said, we're studying them. They finally admitted that. 20 years later, yeah, we're studying this. We don't know what it is. In the last year and a half, there's been some massive bombshells in the UFO community, right? The government's put out all this information.
Like in 2020 when they said the UFOs are existing and we have all these programs where they studied them and no one said anything.
Right.
That one?
That one.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's one of the ones we're referring to, yes.
So this doctor, she publicized all of the photos that she took. So then Nick Pope, who led the British government's version of the X-Files, he investigated the UFO sighting for the Ministry of Defense in the early 90s. And he said, look, everybody who saw this stuff was right. They're right on the money. It's happening. People are seeing it. And it's unfortunate that the U.S. government keeps saying, no. And what was interesting was Kurt Russell, the actor, was flying that night with his son. And he has now come forward. He is a pilot, has been a pilot for years and years, and he and his son were flying that night and saw them firsthand at his altitude.
Cool.
And he's come forward now and said, yeah, call me crazy, I don't care what you call it. We were so rattled that we were calling it in because we didn't know, to the air traffic control center, he's tracking his flight. So he reported it. And an American Airlines also confirmed the sighting and said now the FBI is investigating it. I don't know what good that's going to do, but anyway.
Yeah, throw some more acronyms at it.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, though, because my dad was a pilot all his life, and he had one UFO encounter close to Mount Rainier when he was doing a search and rescue mission up there. Obviously, you fly search and rescue missions during the day because you have a visual observer who's looking for the downed aircraft. Mm-hmm. And he said we were kind of in formation. There were several of us going up there to look for this plane that had gone down. And so there's several of them kind of in a formation. He's the squad leader. And he said all of them had the same experience with the UFO as they passed Mount Rainier to make their approach into the area to start looking. And he said it traveled with them for some time and then went on top of them, below them, around them, and then gone. He said there was a lot of chatter amongst the pilots, but they kind of kept it to themselves. Mm-hmm. So,
and Mount Rainier is another place that's had a lot of activity.
Yes, they have.
Recorded over the years.
So my next one is a pretty famous sighting. It's Rindelsheim military base in Germany. And they had a pretty...
Oh, that was cool.
Yeah, they had a pretty big event that happened there. So
It was a big to-do.
A big to-do. And it's in 1980, so it was on December 26th and 28th. 2 nights that this happened. Security personnel stationed at a nearby the RAF Woodbridge base had reported seeing strange lights in the surrounding forest. And so you've got a lot of people from the town, people who lived in the forest, who saw this. The German police were very quick to squash it and say, nothing happened here, nothing to see here.
They're really good at that.
Yeah. The story was based on a memo from RAF Woodbridge Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt to the Ministry of Defense. So he wrote this memo describing what he saw and the personnel on base saw. It was released by the U.S. government and described the encounter with apparent UFO in the forest as 3 o'clock, and they didn't make it clear if it was 0300 or 3 p.m., but I think it was in the morning, because I believe it was the lights in the dark that attracted everybody's attention, right? On December 26, 1980, a security patrol near the gate of RAF Woodbridge saw the lights apparently descending into the nearby Rendlesham Forest. The lights have been attributed by astronomers to a piece of natural debris. Whatever.
That glows and flies.
That glows and flies.
It is tic-tac shape.
The servicemen initially thought it was a downed aircraft, but upon entering the forest to investigate, they described it as a glowing object, metallic in appearance with colored lights. As they attempted to approach the object, it appeared to move through the trees, and the animals on a nearby farm went into a frenzy. So they're terrified. I mean, animals know. Our chickens quit laying eggs when my dad would buzz the house all the time with the airplanes. They know, they see things, and they're like, what the heck is it, right? Yeah. One of the servicemen, a Sergeant Jim Peniston, later claimed to have encountered a craft with an unknown origin while in the forest, although there was no publicized mention of it at the time, and there is no corroboration from other witnesses. Shortly after 0400, local police were called to the scene, but reported that the only lights they could see were from a lighthouse some miles away on the coast. And some naysayers believe it was all the lighthouse lights. It never happened. The lighthouse is several miles away. It does have one of the brightest lighthouse lights on that coastline, but if you've been around a lighthouse, it's swinging around, so you can count the seconds before it comes again, like an airport strobes, right?
Yeah, it's got a very specific pattern.
Right? So,
well, and you'd think if people in that area would already be familiar with that, they'd know.
Yes,
they were looking
exactly.
At the lighthouse or not.
Right. After daybreak on the morning of 26 December, servicemen returned to the small clearing on the eastern edge of the forest and found 3 small impressions on the ground in a triangular pattern, as well as burn marks and broken branches on nearby trees. The local police were called out again, this time to see the burn impressions. They thought that could be, they were made by animals. So animals are carrying lighters. Damn it. Smokey Bear. Come on now. Just saying.
Probably where he was born.
Anyway, I thought there's a book by a lady called Georgina Bruni, and in her book, You Can't Tell the People, that's the title, she published a photograph of the supposed landing site taken the morning after the first sighting, so that's definitely on my order list. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I've always thought that was an interesting sighting.
What year was that? The 80s?
It was in the 80s.
Did they ever test the burn marks for radiation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, and that radiation's been found in a lot of different areas.
Tim, you're shaking your head yes.
You know. Oh, yeah. So this one time I was a truck driver.
Okay.
I listened to late night radio. Mm-hmm. And late night radio is Art Bell. And he had a whole week-long series dedicated to this. And he actually had, I think there were 6 officers that saw it and reported it and had all types of information. And so there's like a week-long, he dove into it. Mm-hmm. And it was fantastic.
You know, I lied. They did. I'm looking down at my notes. They did test it for radiation, the burn marks. And they took radiation readings of the triangle of depressions using an AN-PDR 27. Mm-hmm. So, just so you know, a standard U.S. military radiation survey meter. They recorded it at 0.07 milliroentgens. I don't.
I
Anyway,
don't know how
it's
they measure
radiation
radiation.
speak.
It's a radiation
Yeah,
thing.
I used a Geiger counter. That's all I know. Okay, per hour. In other regions, they detected 0.03 to 0.04, which is around background level, so it was elevated, but
It's
not.
actually a significant elevation. The
Yeah.
7.
That's significant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's almost double what background is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
But the animals did it.
Yeah, such pigs with lighters. So
And radiated
Flying
things with
pigs.
lights.
yeah, yeah, right. It was during this Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, who visited the site and did the rad readings, he recorded the events on a micro cassette recorder called the Halt tape. So that's out there, apparently. You can hear it now. It was during this investigation that a flashing light was seen across the field to the east, almost in line with the farmhouse. As the witnesses had seen on the first night, the Orford Ness Lighthouse is visible further to the east in the same line of sight. Later, according to Halt's memo, 3 star-like lights were seen in the sky. So this goes on, right? 2 to the north and 1 to the south, about 10 degrees above the horizon. And the brightest of these hovered for 2 to 3 hours and seemed to beam down a stream of light from time to time. Like a helicopter looking for a criminal, but it's a shooting a beam of light down. Astronomers have explained that these are just bright stars. Yeah, I've never
Shooting
seen
beams of light.
shooting beams of light
With flying pigs with lighters.
with pigs with lighters. Yeah,
Radiated lighters.
right. It's those cloven hooves, I tell you. In June 2010, the now retired Colonel Charles Halt signed and notarized an affidavit in which he summarized what had happened, and then stated he believed the event to be extraterrestrial and it had been covered up by both the UK and the US. Contradictions between his affidavit and the facts as recorded at the time in the memo and the tape have been pointed out. Yeah. You got to wonder how much of the memo was retyped,
Edited at the time, yeah.
edited, retyped, redacted.
Redacted. I've never understood the redacted papers. If they're there, the information's there. Give us the information.
Well, yeah. So one of the other cases, and this one's always fascinated me, and it's huge and it has a huge amount of information on it, is the Betty and the Barney Hill abduction. Now, this is this happened in New Hampshire, in a rural New Hampshire, and it was in September 19th to the 20th. It happened over a 24-hour period in 1961. It is the first widely publicized report of alien abduction in the United States. Widely publicized.
Also true, though.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So, although yours may simply be much earlier, the incident became known as the Hill abduction, and the Zeta Reticuli incident, because of the star map shown to Betty Hill, could possibly be the Zeta Reticuli system. That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Anyway, the story was adapted into a 1966 book called The Interrupted Journey and the 1975 film The UFO Incident. So, according to the reports by the Hills, the alleged UFO sighting happened about 10:30 September 19th, 1961 p.m., 10:30 p.m. They were driving back to Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls, and just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty claimed to observe a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter up to the west of the moon. Barney's driving. Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star. You know, all these things going through your head. Yeah, it's nothing, right? Betty finally... The star kept moving erratically, and the light was changing. So she finally is like, Barney, pull over, man. We got to look at this thing, right? So he stops the car, and they decide, well, they have the dog with them. Daisy. I think it's Daisy. No, Delzy. So never mind. I thought it was like my Daisy. Anyway, Delzy. And they decided, let's walk the dog, take a look at this thing. So they have their eye on this thing, and they're walking the dog. and they stopped at a picnic area. There, Betty's looking through binoculars, and she observed an odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights as it traveled across the face of the moon. So she's tracking this thing in her binoculars. Because her sister had several years earlier said she saw a flying saucer, Betty thought, that's what she's saying. Like, wow, that's cool, you know. Through the binoculars, Barney observed what he reasoned was a commercial airliner traveling from Vermont on its way to Montreal. But he changed his mind because without looking as if it turned, it rapidly started coming at them. That's scary, right? That's when you're changing your pants.
Mm-hmm.
This observation caused Barney to say, this is not a plane. And they quickly returned to the car and started driving towards Franconia Notch. It's a narrow mountainous stretch of the road. I guess their thought is, let's get into the mountains as fast as we can because we're exposed out here, right? They started driving on this isolated road, moving very slowly through the notch and the craft's following them now. It's getting closer. At one point, the object passed over a restaurant and the signal tower on top of Cannon Mountain and came out near Old Man of the Mountain, apparently an area back there. Betty testified that it was at least 1.5 times the length of the granite cliff profile. So that profile was 40 feet long. So it's 1.5 times that, right? And it's rotating.
So 80, about 100 feet.
Yeah, about 100 feet, right?
Now,
So
the amount of detail in this is
well, there's quite a
really
story to
interesting
this whole
me.
thing.
Okay.
It's rotating and it's moving erratically and bouncing back and forth in the night. At a mile south of Indian Head, it rapidly descended towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. So and it's silent. It's hovering now. 80 to 100 feet above the hills, 1957 Chevy Bel Air. Wouldn't you love to have
Favorite
that?
car.
I
My
know.
favorite car.
And filled the entire field of view of the windshield. It reminded Barney of a huge pancake. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, he stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object. Using binoculars, Barney claimed to see 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out of the craft's windows, and they were looking at him. In unison, all about one figure moved to what appeared to be a panel on the rear wall, and then, long story short, they're abducted.
Mm-hmm.
They lose time, and when they wake up, they find they have traveled 35 miles south and only had vague, spotty memories of that section of road. So they lose time, and now they're in a different location, or somehow have traveled to this new location. So, they were not silent. They started telling people what happened. Mm-hmm. They actually both went to reported it to the Air Force, who then poo-pooed it all. Mm-hmm. They both went to psychologists to be hypnotized to recount their stories. And their stories were pretty similar. There were some deviations, but then not everybody experiences everything the same way, right? We've talked about that before. So we can both experience something and we have completely different take on it. Mm-hmm. So they believe they were she hung on to their clothing after the abduction, and there was a pink powder left on their clothing, and so that was sent away for chemical and forensic analysis, but I never found out what they found. The car had shiny concentric circles on the car's trunk, and when they went back to that area with a compass, the needle would whirl around and wouldn't stay in a directional heading. So I thought that was interesting. So
what happened to the dog?
I don't know.
Oh no!
I don't know. So
yeah, that's the biggest question. Where's the dog?
oh, where's the dog? It's like the movie. Don't hurt the dog. I don't care what happened to the people,
Leave
right?
the dog alone.
So they for days after the encounter, they were having really vivid dreams. Like she said, you dream, everybody dreams, but these were like super vivid. And they finally had to, she said as soon, like on day 10, the dream stopped completely, like their memories were erased. And that's why they went to hypnosis, because they're like, this is just so weird. What happened to us? So anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Okay, the first thing that jumps out to me about that is that when they first noticed the object, they said it was between the moon and the planet Jupiter. Excuse me. But it seems really specific. I mean, how many people today could identify the planet Jupiter?
I don't think I could. But maybe when they were recounting the story, because remember, somebody had given them the star map, because they talk about it. And so they were trying, maybe they developed that after they saw the map and said, okay, that's where it was in relation to the moon, so it had to be between this and
Well,
Jupiter.
again, though, that's just a level of detail that is
Yeah, so there's a lot of people
not normal for...
Like, there's a lot of information out there on this
Yeah, this is
abduction.
definitely one of the most recorded, talked about.
Yes, and their lives were not
Discussed,
easy after coming forward. It really wasn't. It took years, decades for it to really die down. But they never maintained any kind of secrecy over it either. They were like, this happened to us. We want you to know what happened to us. And they were also, if I believe correctly, an interracial couple. Back in that time
that plays
frame.
into a lot of the
Yeah,
stories.
so I think it was a black man and a white woman married. And I don't think at that time probably was frowned upon, and rightfully so. But you know what I mean? It was that era. And so I think there was a lot of factors that came into this. Like when they came forward, everybody just thought they were nuts anyway because of your lifestyle and this and that. They probably got a lot of flack. Boiling down from generations of that.
And
too.
I wonder.
And I don't like that.
I often wondered, though, if that's why they weren't afraid to mention what happened to them.
Maybe.
Because of everything they'd already lived through.
Yeah, we've already been through all the hatred.
Being an interracial couple.
Yeah.
You know, all the comments they've already had and the hatred and everything.
Yeah.
It's like, what can they do to us that they haven't already done?
Maybe. There's
by
a lot
talking
out
about
there.
what we experience. So.
Yeah, there's a lot out there on the from the psychiatrist to hypnotize them. There's a lot of information on their hypnosis sessions. There's quite a lot of information. So a lot of people are saying this is completely made up, blah, blah, blah. But when you go through hypnosis, and I have gone through it to get past like a traumatic event, right? A lot of people say that you see them at the fair, they can make you quack like a duck and stuff like that. Maybe they can, but you're not bringing something forward that you have not experienced unless I would think a doctor is very, very skilled at planting a memory that's not really there. I think that can probably happen. But if they're hypnotizing you and it's recorded, because my sessions were recorded.
All recorded.
Yeah, my sessions were recorded, right? And so I could play them back or watch them. So I know what they're doing. And I know how I'm responding. I'm hearing it. So I don't know back then if they were. Probably not.
Well, that's another thing.
know.
Is that where was the field of hypnosis back then?
I don't know.
So that's another interesting part that they would choose that modality to try to work through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of some questionable stuff in there. You keep reading, you're like, oh, I believe him. Oh, I don't know if I believe him. Oh, I do believe him, you know. So I really didn't prepare a third story because there's so much. One of the things that we did talk about when we talked about Skinwalker Ranch was the UFO sightings that happen in the Uinta Basin. So as early back as in the early 1800s, UFO sightings were publicized in the local newspapers. And there is a story of a family, and it's pretty well documented, a family that was traveling on the highway through there, real close to the Skinwalker Ranch, who was chased by a UFO for like 12 miles. The UFO, he said it was like 6 feet off the ground, right behind the vehicle, and just terrified them. There are encounters in that basin that people who have had really close encounters with these objects end up with really funky cancers. So a lot of tribal members have had close encounters with these things. Like they'll walk out of a building late at night and all of a sudden there's a beam of light on them or something. They end up with a really weird cancer very soon after that. So the radiation coming off these things is pretty intense to cause some of these cancers, I would think. I don't know what else it could be, right?
Usually radiation things.
But there was something I ran across, and it's called Geophysical Variables and Behavior, 23, Relationships between UFOs and UFO reports within the Uinta Basin and local seismicity. So apparently, when there's a series of earthquakes down there, there's a rash of UFO sightings.
Oh, really?
I've heard that. It's very interesting.
Yes.
I have heard of that.
Yeah. So I thought that was a really interesting kind of a parallel thing that's happening. And that I think is something that I'm going to, on, all the copious amounts of spare time that I have in my life, I'm going to start going down that rabbit trail and let's research that topic because I thought that was fascinating. Now, having growing up in Northern California, lots of earthquakes in California, right? Not so much where I grew up, but lots of. So I wonder if there's UFO sightings connected with seismic activity all over the world.
Interesting.
Or is this just a basin phenomenon? I don't know. But
That's very interesting.
if any of our listeners happen to know.
Yes and no. There have been recording of seismic activity, which of course when, the earth moves
Right.
against each other, rocks and stones and things like that. And it will actually, for lack of a better term or to explain it, they will create sparks. And so there has been recording of balls of like a large spark after earthquake activity.
So that could be the UFO people are
That
seeing.
could be the UFO. Could be.
Wow.
I'm not saying it is. I'm saying that in certain situations when an earthquake happens,
Yeah.
So what they're
that
saying
is
in this,
a possible explanation for that.
the number of UFO reports per month during this classic UFO flap that happened in 1967, there was a lot. There was like 100 or more in the Uinta Basin. There was this rash of UFO sightings, right? And they said numbers of UFO reports were not correlated significantly with earthquake activities at distances of greater than 150 kilometers. But the strongest correlation occurred between UFO reports and nearby seismic activity within the same month, but not for previous or consecutive months. So it was just that event, that 1 month event. So I think it's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It's when the UFOs were building their base.
Oh, that
Or it
could
could be your good alien, bad alien theory.
Oh,
Could be.
yeah.
Maybe they like studying the gerbils and where the gerbils live.
That could be.
How would they be? Yeah, it's kind of fascinating, though. You'd think if a UFO was going to actually come down and study gerbils, they'd go down to a population center,
Yeah.
not a sparsely populated area.
Or maybe they're just interested in the planet.
But there is a Facebook group for fans of the Skinwalker Ranch, right? There's this Facebook group, and there's a subdivision not far from the ranch. I mean, and they capture people that are out there in their yards drinking beer every time there's something's going on outside, woo, like we did in Texas for tornadoes. He was like, hey, tornadoes coming. We all sit there and drank a beer. So, yeah, crazy. So they actually, people in this subdivision have filmed these lights, these beams of light that are coming down over the Skinwalker Ranch.
Huh.
Yeah. But this area in there, the little town right there, we're close to the ranch. Everything always comes back to Skinwalker. This town has a really high incidence of cancers there.
So crazy.
That we've studied that before for like our very first, I think, podcast was Skinwalker. And there's just some like bizarre, weird things, and it usually parallels with these close encounters. So
Not a coincidence.
no,
So you ready for my story?
yeah,
Yes.
Da-da-da. So, as previously stated, this one time, I was a truck driver. And I was going down the road, and the way the mirror is situated, it's right in the peripheral vision. And it was at night, and usually I was by myself. And I noticed a light on the horizon back at me. And you know just like the timing of like a light blinking, like an antenna, whatever you want to say that,
Right.
whatever that timing
That's
is.
strobing, yeah.
The strobing. It went from that to my peripheral to the other horizon.
That's pretty quick.
That's more than pretty quick. That's really
Like, we don't
fast.
have anything that can go that fast.
Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, that's weird. Chalk that
Was
up
this
to
in Mountain
weird
Home
things
again?
truck drivers drive. No, actually, it was right past Twin Falls.
Okay.
All the
Not
way to
far.
Mountain
Now,
Home.
yeah, on the way to Mountain Home. Yeah.
It was right off of King Hill.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, that's weird. And I kept on trucking.
Mm-hmm.
So to back up, so the particular company I work for, it was a contractor for the post office. So he left the door at the exact same time.
Mm-hmm.
My truck was governed at 62 miles an hour. That's as fast as that thing went.
Boy, that would drive me crazy.
It was horrible. It was so horrible. So I always had it going
As fast
62
as
miles an hour. Always.
Yeah.
So I leave the door at the same time. My cruise control is the exact same.
Right.
I get to the spot where I take a break at the exact same time every single day. Because that's what happens.
Right.
I showed up exactly 19 minutes late than I usually do.
Huh, so you had the lost time.
Spooky.
Wow. Did you find an implant yet?
Not yet. Still working on it.
Did you
I have a
one
metal
too?
detector. Let's scan you.
So when I got there, I was like,
What happened?
wonder how fast that thing really was blinking.
That's fascinating.
Oh, by the way, you've already taken your break. Get back to work.
Exactly. And that's what I was most mad of at
Yeah.
the time.
Like, you couldn't have picked a more convenient time to abduct me?
Next time, do it after the break, people.
Seriously. That's spooky.
Wow.
That's totally
That's
crazy.
my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Good deal. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today on Speaking of Spirits. We have got UFOs. We've got things flying. We've got people being abducted. We've got government telling us this isn't happening. That's where we are. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you on the next podcast.
Ha 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 ha!